have. Today we'll be discussing about CSS Basics. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So let's proceed to the next slide. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. It is a way to divide the content from the layout on the web page. So the content will be defined by HTML and the layout will be, of course, by CSS. So how it works? Number one, a style is a definition of font, colors, etc. Number two, each style has unique name, which is called a selector. The selectors and their styles are defined in one place. The selector is just similar to the selector of, let's say for example, in Microsoft Word. If you're going to format a text, you have to select the text. But of course, you do that using maybe by using the mouse or the keyboard. But here, we're going to select using codes, using a code. Okay, so maybe it can be an HTML tag, etc. So we'll be learning more of this as we go on. So here now, let us now discuss selectors. Selectors are the names that you give to your different styles. In the style definition, you define how each selector should work. So font, color, etc. Then in the body of your pages, you refer to these selectors to activate the styles. So let's discuss the first type of selector, which is called the tag or HTML selector. So again, it's also called HTML selector because they affect HTML tags, or they select HTML tags. So the syntax is we have the HTML selector. So HTML selector, then we have the open curly braces, and then we have the property, column, colon, then followed by value. So property, colon, and then value, and then we have here our semicolon. So we can have many of these in one selector. So as an example, we have here H1. Then that means that all H1 in our HTML code will be affected by this. And then color here is an example of a property. So colon, and then blue is an example of the value that we can give to this property, or the value of this property. So what this means is that H1 here will be colored blue. Okay, so to demonstrate that, I'll be showing you here an HTML file. So let us examine this file. So I have here the head, title, and then let's take a look at the body of the file. I have here H1. So I have here H1, University of Luzon. H2 that contains Dagupan City, and another H1. So I'll be explaining more of the ID later on. So another H1, but with an ID attribute. So College of Computer Studies, and then H1 again, and then another paragraph. So I actually have here 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph, so P up to this part, I place an ID equal to message. Then the next paragraph, I place a class named normal paragraph. Again, what are these? These are attributes. And then the same. So I have the same class for this paragraph and another paragraph with the same class. So named normal paragraph. So again, so our HTML file contains H1 and H1, H2, another H1, and 4 paragraphs. So where do I place how do I place a style? CSS style. Usually, we can place a style here. So I'll just do this first, and then I'll explain that later in one of our slides. So each one, excuse me, will now be my selector. So just type H1, then open curly brace and ends with the open close curly braces. So close curly brace, and then place here now the property. So let's say, for example, I want to change the color property. So color, and then that's a property, colon, and then the value of the property. Let's say the value of the property is blue. So I will save, and then let me launch my web. So you notice this one is using H1 and this one is also using H1. So all tags that are using H1 will be affected by my style because I place here an HTML selector. So let us go on with our slides. So that's for the tag selector. Now let's take a look at class selector. A class selector are used when you when you want to define a style that does not redefine an HTML tag entirely. So as an example, or for the syntax, that class name. So we first place a dot before the name of the class, and then open curly brace, and then close curly brace, and then inside will be same as the tag selector, property and value. So what's the difference? In an HTML selector, we don't have a dot before the name of the selector. But for a class selector, we place a dot before the class name. So as an example, we have here dot red, color red. So as we have placed a P, class equals red. So this is a class name. That's why to refer to that, we can use the class attribute and then P. So let's now again demonstrate that in our HTML file. So you notice here, I have here a class named normal paragraph. So I'm going to type here dot normal paragraph. Okay, I know it won't look good, but and to simplify things, let us just use color properties first. So color, let's color this as red. So that means that all elements with the class normal paragraph will be colored red. So here I have here 3 paragraphs. So let's save that again and refresh our HTML file. So allow me to make this larger so that you can view the text of the HTML document. So again, I'm going to refresh. So you notice my last 3 paragraphs are colored red. So that's the use of the class selector. Now let's go on with our slide. The next selector is what we call the ID selector. Excuse me. So selects HTML with the specified ID. So the syntax is, we have here the number symbol or the hashtag or the octothorpe symbol, and then we have the ID selector. Again, the same format, curly brace, property, value. We can have a list of these, and then it ends with the close curly brace. So as an example, we have here, so number sign layer 1, that means that's an ID selector. Then color red again. So how do you use this one? You can refer to that using the ID attribute, because this is again an ID selector. So let's again demonstrate that. So in our document, previously you'll notice that College of Computer Studies is also colored blue because it is also using H1. And we have here H1, so H1. But let's say, for example, I want the College of Computer Studies to have a different color. So this time around, I'm going to select that element by using the ID selector. So ID college. I'm going to place a different color for that. Let's say, for example, color green. So that means that this one will be selecting this because I'm using here an ID selector. So we'll be comparing that or matching that with attributes of IDs. So in this case, ID equals college for this particular element. So let's try to refresh. So you notice now that my College of Computer Studies is now colored green. So let's proceed with our slide or our PowerPoint presentation. We also have what we call group selector, but yes, we have a group selector. So most often selectors will share some of the same styles, for example, being based on the same font. And in these cases, rather than defining the font for each and every selector one by one, you can just group them and thus assign the font to all selectors at once. So, but in our case, we'll be assigning a text alignment to our headings. So I have here. So how do we do that? We just have a list of all the selectors. So again, the selectors are separated by comma, and then we have the property value. So just in this example, we have H1, H2, H3. All of these are aligned. So text align center. So in our code, let's say I want H1 and H2 to be aligned or to be centered. H1 comma H2. That's an example of a group selector. So there are tag selectors, but we have them grouped. So text align, then place here center. So what does that mean? That the text for H1 and H2 will be centered. So let's now view our document. So refresh. So you notice now that all H1, both of these are H1 and H2 are now centered. Then we also have what we call the context dependent selector. So it is possible to make selectors that will only work in certain contexts. So usually the syntax for this is selector 1, selector 2, but you notice we don't have a comma that separates the two selectors. Then we have property value. This means that the style specified will only affect those who are selected by selector 2 if they are also within selector 1. So if that's not clear with you, I will be giving you here an example. So H1B, that's an example of a context dependent selector, color blue, and we have B color red. So we have here B and another B/B. But this particular B is not actually inside H1. So this B or this element B or this particular element will be colored red, not blue. While the word here will be colored blue, it's because B is inside H1. So B is inside H1. That's an example of a context dependent selector. let's say if we can demonstrate that in our code. Let's say this one M so slash M and let's say here we also have here M emphasize computer studies slash M. But let's say that if our M is inside the ID message, okay, because both are P, so ID message, then it is both italic and bold. So how do we specify that? So I'm going to place here message space and then EM. Font, what's that? Font style italic, font weight bold. But for the next one, we have class. What's a class? Normal paragraph EM. Let's say font style still italic, but this time around let's say color is what color? Teal, for example. So we have EM for these two paragraphs, but this one will only be affected by this one because again EM is inside message, and this one, this emphasis or this element will be only affected by this. So font style is italic and color should be teal. Let's examine the document. So let's refresh. So again, so this becomes italic and bold. So you notice in your Dagupan it's not in bold face, and this one is also italic, but the color is now in teal. So that's an example of context dependent selector. So let's go on with our PowerPoint presentation. Now, where do we place our CSS tags? So there are several ways. One is inline. So when you say inline, you type an attribute style equals and then you place here the property and value, just like in this case. Now, this method is not actually highly recommended. So you do this, you should rarely do this. And if, let's say, for example, your selectors can affect the whole page only, one page only, then you can place it in style/style, inside style/style. And that is actually what I have done here. If we're going to look at my document, so I place all my CSS inside style/style. And that is also inside head/head. That should be inside head/head. And one of the most recommended way to place your CSS tag is to place it in an independent file. Oh, wait. So in this example, it is a file that is named whatever.css. That is where you place your tags. And you place this code inside your inside head. So link rel equals style sheet, href equals, this is now the file name, then type equals text slash CSS. So that's an example of placing the CSS in, and it will affect the entire site. Later on, maybe we'll be doing something like this in our next examples. Okay, so that's it. Now let's take a look at some of the common properties. So font properties, we have font family. So an example, font family Arial, comma Helvetica. So you can place several names of font. Okay, and then font style, normal, italic, oblique. So these are examples. Maybe some of these will not be working anymore because, or it depends on your browser. So it does not necessarily mean that if it is here, it will work in all browsers. That's why if you notice in one of our first slide, I asked you or I recommended that if you were really serious in web design, you have to have several browsers. You have to test your work in several browsers. So we have your font weight for bold, font size, so we can specify the length, the font size, etc. Let's try some of these. Let's go back to our code. Or let's first take a look at our output. Let's say I want to make or change the font of College of Computer Studies. So how will I do that? So that's ID College, and font family Arial, and then font weight bolder. Okay, so these are examples of the font properties. So let's refresh. So you notice that I have changed my font, and maybe that's bolder. Okay, so you can actually apply some of those as we go on. All you have to do is to have a list of this, and you can apply any of these properties. For text property, maybe we have the line height. So line height normal, line height 1.5, etc. So we'll be trying that later. Well, let's try that now. Line height. Let's say I want my normal paragraph to have a line height of 1.5. So let's take a look at the original HTML file or as viewed in on a browser. Let's refresh. So what did you notice? The spacing of my paragraph actually changed a bit, but I think it was not so noticeable. Let's try 2, line height 2. Let's refresh. So you notice that's now double space, or oh no, I placed it in the wrong. That's why the other paragraphs are not affected. I should place it here. Sorry about that. So line height 1.5. So let's try that. Let's refresh. So you notice that it has changed the spacing of the lines for my paragraphs. So what else do we have here in our slides? Text transform. So we can have none, capitalized, uppercase, lowercase. Let's say I convert the text in my on the University of Luzon all in uppercase. Let's go back to our code. So University of Luzon here is not in uppercase, but I want H1 to be in uppercase. So we have here text. What's that? Text. I forgot. It's text transform. Text transform. So upper case. So what will that do? Refresh. So you notice all of my H1 are now all in upper case. So what else? Go back to our PowerPoint presentation. So text align, we have done that last time. So you can again experiment on this. The next is on color. We have done that already. So how about background color? So here are different ways to place colors, but I'll be discussing more of this maybe in our next slide. But here are several ways. We can have the common names, or we can have the hexadecimal value, or we can have the we can use the RGB. So for now, let's say I would like to make use of the background color. So background color. Let's say I want to have a background color for my file. So I could change the color of my body. Body. So that's also a tag. Background color, let's say light yellow. So that's an example of a common name. So originally, that's my file, F5. So you notice now that I have a light yellow background. So again, I just have here some sort of the basics of CSS. So I also have placed here the basics of some of the properties, so font properties, text property, and color properties that you can now already use in your HTML files. And we'll be having more of this as we go on. Again, this one should be background, wrong spelling. Sorry about that. So again, so thank you for watching, and other lessons will be on our next slides. Thank you very much.